There is a stillness that settles over the world in the dead of night, a profound quiet that creeps in as the clock crawls towards midnight. The streets are empty, homes are hushed, and the shadows in our rooms stretch and deepen. It is in this silence that the witching hour begins, an enigmatic window of time, steeped in legend, superstition, and a sense of palpable dread. Traditionally, this is the period between midnight and 3 a.m., with folklore often pinpointing 3 in the morning as the hour when the veil between worlds is at its most fragile and supernatural forces are at their peak. But why has this specific time captured the human imagination for centuries? Let us explore the origins and the chilling psychological impact of this haunting hour. The term witching hour first entered the English language in the 18th century, but its roots run deep into the soil of European folklore. In an age lit only by flickering candlelight, when the night was thick with unknown dangers, people believed this was the time when otherworldly beings roamed freely. It was said that under the heavy cloak of darkness, witches would gather to cast their spells, unimpeded by the protective rays of the sun. The writer Matthew Lewis, in his 1796 novel The Monk, used the term to describe the precise hour when supernatural creatures were most likely to appear. Over time, popular culture has cemented this association, turning midnight into a threshold between the ordinary and the uncanny. But what is it about these particular hours that stirs such primal fear? Part of the answer lies within our own biology. The witching hour coincides with our body's natural circadian rhythms. Between midnight and 3 a.m., most of us are in our deepest stages of sleep, and the world outside is at its quietest. This profound silence amplifies every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind, making us exquisitely susceptible to feelings of unease.
The mind, drifting in the liminal space between sleep and wakefulness, can blur the boundaries that separate nightmare from reality. It is no wonder that so many people report experiencing sleep paralysis, vivid night terrors, or even ghostly apparitions during these hours. Consider this chilling piece of lore. In many cultures, 3 a.m. is known as the Devil's Hour, a dark inversion of 3 p.m., the time when Christ is believed to have died on the cross. It is said that at this precise moment, the boundary between the living and the dead is at its thinnest. In Mexico, stories of La Llorona, the weeping woman, tell of her mournful cries echoing through the night, a sound most often heard during the witching hour. In Eastern Europe, tales of vampires and restless spirits abound, with villagers lighting candles or reciting prayers to ward off evil as the clock struck 12. Modern psychologists suggest that the power of the witching hour may be less about spirits and more about the architecture of our own minds. At this time, sleep deprivation is at its peak. Our anxieties surface with greater intensity, and our perception of time itself can warp in the darkness. Studies have shown that people are more prone to feelings of dread and paranoia in these early morning hours, which may explain why so many ghost stories and paranormal encounters are set during this time. Ultimately, the witching hour is a potent blend of folklore, biology, and psychology. Whether you see it as a supernatural gateway or a mirror reflecting our deepest fears, there is no denying the grip that midnight's shadows hold on our collective imagination. As the world slumbers, we are left alone with our thoughts, and perhaps with something else entirely. Imagine standing alone in a quiet room when an old telephone suddenly rings, despite not being connected to any line. This phenomenon, the call from beyond, has unsettled people for centuries, long before the invention of the telephone itself. Cultures across the globe have stories of messages from the departed, but with the rise of technology, these tales have taken on a strange and terrifying new form. In the Victorian era, spiritualists hosted seances, believing they could communicate with the dead through knocks, raps, and disembodied voices. But as telegraphs and telephones became commonplace, new tales emerged. Ghostly calls, ringing phones with no apparent caller, static-laden voices whispering cryptic messages, and even entire conversations with deceased loved ones. Alexander Graham Bell himself was reportedly intrigued by the idea of contacting the spirit world, and his rival, Thomas Edison, even claimed to be working on a spirit phone to bridge the divide between the living and the dead. One chilling example occurred in Chicago in the 1970s. A woman named Mary received repeated late-night calls from her recently deceased mother. The voice, frayed as static, thin and distant, would call her by an affectionate childhood nickname and share memories that only her mother could have known. Mary reported feeling a paralyzing mixture of terror and comfort, unsure if she was experiencing a vivid, grief-induced hallucination or something far more mysterious. Psychical researchers documented similar incidents, noting that these calls often occurred around the anniversary of a loved one's death or at times of great emotional distress. Modern technology has only expanded the scope of such phenomena. There are documented cases of voicemails received from phone numbers disconnected years earlier, or text messages arriving from accounts belonging to those long passed away. In Japan, following the 2011 tsunami, survivors spoke of receiving calls from numbers that had ceased to exist, with voices that eerily resembled lost friends and family. Paranormal investigators suggest that our electronic devices may act as conduits, amplifying faint signals from the spirit world.
Skeptics, of course, point to technical glitches, cruel hoaxes, or the mind's desperate attempts to find comfort in loss. Is it possible that grief and longing can open a channel to the unknown, or are these calls simply echoes of our own sorrow? The call from beyond remains one of the most personal and unnerving manifestations of our desire to connect with what lies on the other side. But these encounters rarely begin and end with a single cryptic call. They escalate. This escalation is a hallmark of a predatory supernatural presence, and it unfolds in stages, often so gradually that the victim barely notices the shift until it is far too late. At first, the contact might seem benign, even comforting, a familiar voice, a shared memory, a fleeting sense of connection to someone who is gone. This is the lure, designed to exploit grief and lower your defenses. But over time, the nature of the contact begins to change. The calls become more frequent, more demanding. What started as a whisper through static may become a clear, insistent voice. The content shifts from comforting memories to unsettling commands or warnings. The entity might discourage you from speaking to friends or family, insisting that only it understands your pain. This is the beginning of a terrifying process of isolation. The presence works to methodically sever your connections to the living world, creating a feedback loop of fear and dependence. It might mimic the voices of other loved ones to sow distrust, or drain your emotional energy until you no longer have the will to reach out. Without access to outside perspectives, it becomes increasingly difficult to recognize how unnatural the situation has become. You are alone, with only the voice for company. And then come the warnings. In a cruel twist, the entity itself may be the one to issue them. A voice sounding exactly like a lost loved one might whisper, "Don't answer next time, it's a trap," or "It hears you." Lock the door. These warnings create a terrible paradox, forcing the victim into a state of confusion and terror. Who is the warning for, and who is it from? Ignoring the warning feels like a betrayal of the loved one whose voice you hear, but answering feels like stepping further into the darkness. These warnings are not meant to save you. They are a form of psychological torture designed to break down your will. And once your will is broken, the manifestation begins. This is the moment the shadows take shape. The hints and whispers become a physical reality. The lurking threat steps out of the static and into your world. It starts small, a shadow that moves in your peripheral vision, a cold spot in the room that has no source, the feeling of being watched when you are completely alone. Then, the physical world itself may begin to warp around you. A phone screen that cracks without being dropped. A dark, viscous fluid that seeps from electronic devices, carrying the faint, sweet smell of decay and antiseptic. The entity is no longer just a voice on the phone. It is present. The shadows are no longer an absence of light. They are a presence, and it is inside your home. What is left in the aftermath? When the calls stop and a final, deafening silence falls, what does an outsider find? Often, the scene is one of chilling normality. There are no signs of a struggle, no broken windows, no forced entry. The apartment is clean, The furniture is in its place, but the person is gone. Not taken, not kidnapped, erased. All that remains is a single, inexplicable clue. The phone, sitting on a nightstand, perfectly intact. But in the call log, there is one missed call from a familiar name, received at 3 a.m. A call that, according to the records, was never made. Sometimes, those who discover the scene are left with a final, corrupted artifact. A single photograph on the phone's camera roll, taken moments before the disappearance.
It might show the victim, their face pale with terror, looking into their own phone. But in the reflection on the screen, or in the shadows behind them, another figure can be seen. A figure with a familiar face, but with eyes that are nothing but black, empty voids. This is the proof, the impossible evidence of what has occurred, ensuring that the story will be dismissed as a delusion, a tragic breakdown. The disappearance of both the person and any credible proof leaves behind only a lingering, horrifying mystery. This has given rise to a modern urban legend, a piece of digital folklore whispered about in the darkest corners of the internet. The legend of the +1. They say that when a loved one dies, their contact in your phone doesn't just represent a memory. It becomes a dormant gateway. And sometimes something else finds that gateway. It attaches itself. The contact name changes, adding a +1 to the end. This isn't a typo, it's a designation. It means something has been added. An entity has latched on to the echo of your grief. This legend is a final warning. It says that the entity uses the voice of the dead as a mask, preying on those who are most vulnerable. It begins its work during the witching hour. It uses a call from beyond to make first contact. It isolates you, escalates its attacks, and breaks you down with impossible warnings. And when it finally manifests, it does not come to haunt. It comes to collect. They say the +1 is not a country code. It's not a glitch in the system. It is the entity announcing its presence before it takes you to become a +1 yourself. Another voice in the static, another whisper from beyond the grave. It's a chilling story, meant to remind us that our technology, our connections, can be turned against us. It's a reminder that grief leaves a door open, and you never know what might be listening on the other side, waiting for you to pick up the phone. It waits for you every night. And it already knows your number.